Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time to come listen to this wonderful presentation by faculty. This was instigated apparently by Associate Professor Lauren Deeg, who did a lot of work during the pandemic. It was I guess a time when we all had a lot of time, but I didn't do anything. And so instigated this idea of getting other faculty to talk about the work that they had done during that time of quietness, I guess. So it's wonderful that they are here to share their work. I don't know what their content is, but I'll introduce Lauren Deeg, Joe Blaylock, Josh Cogashow, Anna DeBrea, Craig Farnsworth, Kevin, who just broke his foot, and Miguel San Miguel. Where is Miguel? That's a problem. Okay, so when you're done with this, after the presentations, you're invited to go look at the exhibit. If you walk down this hall, you'll see Professor Deeg's work on the right-hand side by the Dean's office. Beautiful, amazing work. Thank you for that, Lauren. And then I believe further on in the atrium space is where everyone else's work is. Is that correct? That's far away from me, so I didn't see it, but I will. So anyway, I'll introduce Lauren. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. I want to thank Malcolm for insisting that I hang some of the work produced in the last 2 years. So thank you to Malcolm, our exhibits coordinator, for all of your work. Yeah. And for convincing me to put together something. I want to thank Christine and Val for all of their work putting this together. Thank you, Christine and Val, and Lori for all of their work putting this together. So as Andrea said, this was an idea that Christine had and I over coffee one day. I think it was about a year ago, maybe 6 months ago. Hey, wouldn't it be great if all the faculty who did stuff during lockdown exhibited their stuff? And it hit me, it's like, wait a minute, Charlie Sappenfeld used to have a tradition of having faculty shows every year, and so yes, we are reviving this idea of getting together and showing some of our work. So this is a little bit of what I learned over that time. A viral video of Jim Carrey doing painting in his New York studio and sort of the type of soul searching that he does in this particular video. It's called I Needed Color. And I think it was filmed before the pandemic, but it really set what some of the conditions were in terms of a time of solitude and a time of quietness. It taught me that there's an opportunity to take solitude and understand it as a temporary gift of focus, and that it's a reminder that we have the ability to find beauty wherever we are. And these are chickadee footprints taken yesterday in the snow and the tessellated patterns that they leave behind. As an urban planner, I'm also looking for beauty in the everyday. What we call infrastructure, what we call road improvements, still have some of the artistic imprint on the landscape, if you will. That person injecting asphalt onto the street has a sense of form and has a sense of function and has an understanding of the medium that they are using and applies a technique into or achieve their objectives. Is that not what some of us do with our work? How about that? So that right there is the corner of Beechwood and Dix, which is part of my daily commute. We also choose to react to the conditions we're given. We may not be in control of all the conditions we have in a pandemic, but we can choose to control our reaction to things. So everybody in this building and in this college are builders of more. We add things to the landscape. We add things to the environment. So how do we choose to, what do we add to this? Are we building more anxiety or are we building more calm? So I got interested in teaching first year with Professor Metz and Professor Tursky and many others in surrealist games and how they could unlock potential, creative potential in first year students. And one of the surrealist games is called automatic drawing, and that is a sense of just grabbing a pencil or pen and starting to tap into the unconscious mind. I don't know if the surrealists were able to untap the unconscious mind, but it does untap a few perhaps portions of creativity that perhaps wouldn't normally come out. And so I wouldn't argue that maybe I'm doing more along with our Muncie friend here. Every painting that he did had a spark of an idea or had an initial idea, but he did react to what was going on the canvas. And if he made a mistake, he never called it a mistake. He referred to it as a happy accident. So that gets you to accept things as they move on. And I wouldn't call these automatic drawings, but this is just getting to know my iPad and getting to know Procreate and starting to have some fun with techniques of underpainting and with patterns and overlaying patterns and dealing with depth and layers and all those wonderful things that the Procreate does for you, and start to explore just tapping that unconscious mind, if you will. Maybe that's the closest thing to automatic drawing that I had. So I'll move forward. Then I got interested in acrylic markers and imaginary cities. We deal with the Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino a lot in first year, and so that started to inspire some imaginary cityscapes built up on treated canvas, and those are in the hallway for you to see. Some of them are influenced by real places. This is Cronley Street in Ghent, and so there is, in my time of solitude, if you will, there was these opportunities to remember places or be inspired by places, or even what I call imaginary travel. Then it got interesting. Okay. Then it got interesting. Inspired by Professor Schwartz encouraging me to do sections in her third-year studio years ago, I started to investigate the section as a space definer. So this is a series of sections of churches, of cities, and of interesting places that perhaps have their own cultures. This one on the left is a culture of Copernicans who study the stars and examine the planets and have a culture onto their own. Others were memorials or tombs to philosophers or arenas for chess matches, although the people watching this chess match here don't know that the actual game is being played in the lower depths. So, others were other imaginary cities that may be underground or underwater or somewhere in between, as well as a few churches or a few tombs. Not all the pieces are finished. I felt it was important that even though I didn't finish every piece, but to show the pieces, because we show our process in this building. And so this gives you a little bit of a sense into my working process and how each of these drawings come together in the layers. So they're exhibited even though they are unfinished. Other more portable things start to happen, and perhaps another nod to Bob Ross, if you will, these imaginary landscapes that perhaps are more pastoral, more idyllic, but really looking for a sense of calm and a sense of comfort. And others were perhaps places of ruin, a city in ruin, or more other idealized places. But each one of these in the spirit of Bob Ross, just starting with an initial idea and then accepting whatever happens. And so that said, I thank you and encourage all of you to go and create the world that you want to live in. Remember that Bob Ross said, it's your world. It's your world. And so therefore, as you start to explore these different techniques in art and self-expression, remember that that little slice of creativity is your world. So I encourage you all to create the world that you want to live in. Thank you very much. I give it over to Joe.
Good afternoon. I'm Joe Blaylock, faculty member in landscape architecture and urban design. I'm a creative, I'm a designer, I'm an artist. For me, being a designer is about creating for others. As an artist, I create primarily for myself. I do have a social media presence, and you can find me on Instagram and a couple different websites, but today I'm going to open my sketchbooks. I'm an avid sketchbook keeper. When I was in undergraduate school at Syracuse in New York, I was taught that we needed three things. We needed a well-used passport, we needed a good personal library, and we needed a sketchbook with a plastic bag. And the plastic bag was supposed to be big enough for our sketchbook and our hands because we were expected to go outside and sketch in the snow. I am an urban sketcher. One of the conditions is that you sketch in the place and you sketch the place. One of my last trips before the shutdown was to the NOMOS convention in New York. So the sketch on the left is actually from Chinatown. It was sort of my last outing before the pandemic lockdown. The other two are sketches from Indianapolis, in and around downtown. So during the pandemic, we were dreaming about going to places and drawing them. We had to rely more on visiting places virtually. And this led me to going into some interesting places that I've always wanted to go, and now perhaps easier, or places that I wanted to return to. So Bill and Ted's Circle K right outside of Phoenix, or Slide Rock in Sedona. For me, one such place is Arizona. I have a connection, I have family that lives out there. And I got to spend a couple times over the last couple summers on the Navajo reservation. So I enjoy that landscape and enjoy the people. But this allowed me to experience visiting it virtually because I got to play with various materials and techniques. And so one of those was the iPad and the Procreate app. And you saw Lauren had some of that as well. So, and also, while at the time I felt it might be odd or at least out of place to pull out an iPad on the reservation. We were also at home. We were sketching where we were. I was at home sketching my giant hostas, or at a local park sketching trees, or in line to vote, or in line at Jiffy Lube. And it's amazing the things that you'll be able to capture if you just have your sketchbook with you. Because I like to say, if you're breathing, you should have a sketchbook with you. When we did get to travel again, I took full advantage. Traveled to the mountains of Colorado to sketch the main street of Idaho Springs from the comfort of my favorite pizza shop. Even easier to social distance from the outdoors in the Upper Peninsula or the coast of Massachusetts, from the seat of a bicycle on the C&O Trail in Maryland, or from my hotel room in St. Louis. When I didn't travel, I still filled up sketchbooks with the things around me. I always feel like I have to keep my hands moving, and so I'm always creating. So 3 things that I sketch the most is while I'm doodling from my home studio are 1, trees. These are some of the trees that I can see from my desk, and then also a whole collection of trees that come from my imagination. The second thing I tend to sketch a lot is a lot of fruit still lifes, the pear being my favorite. This allows me to experiment with different materials and techniques, both traditional and digital. So there's some Procreate things in pencil and watercolor and gouache. And the third are imaginary landscapes, where I work on composition and balance and layering. And the advantages to some of these are that no one can see what I'm actually sketching or imagining. They're purely for me. I don't often post them to social media, and in fact, counter to what you might think, you can still enjoy them without seeking the approval of others. So during a period of mind-numbing AutoCAD work when I was in practice, I began to watercolor and paint in the evenings for no other reason than just pure joy and to loosen myself up. And I coined this phrase, unnecessary creation. I had forced myself to be quick and expressive, and this led to a lot of experimentation with materials such as gouache and oils, and then further into digital painting. So my propensity to order sometimes holds me up. I have a desire to be freer and to do more abstract paintings, but I found that doing quick vignettes like these, which are from airplane windows, where I saw patterns and orders, led me to create new and interesting compositions. So these are all from a plane trip across the United States. So then I would then create my own imaginary landscapes from aerial perspectives, where I began to fill up more and more of my sketchbook pages. And that sometimes turns into fun pop, as Lauren would call me, a fauvist, Procreate creations, and sometimes gallery pieces. So this is a copy of this is actually in the gallery. There's also a framed version of this floating around East Central Indiana right now with the Open Space Art About the Land exhibit. I was also inspired to create some really simple pieces. I tried several that look like paper cutouts in perspectives and in aerials, and they look like they're textured and crafted, but they're created purely in Procreate, just for me to try something new. I have several whole sketchbooks full of watercolor textures, patterns, and splatters. Again, these are purely for me. They were for the pure joy of seeing paints mix on the paper, often an uncontrolled and meditative process as I lay down a color and wait for it to dry before applying the next color. Sometimes they turned into things like the bottom one, which is just an imaginative floral pattern. One of those sketchbook pages was an experiment with watercolor, wax resist, and crayons that looks like a technique that I'd often teach for reflective water when I was doing swimming pools. And this led to a larger piece and a whole series of explorations that are roughly 40 to 46 inches wide by 12 inches tall. So for comparison, a lot of the other things that I was drawing are the size of postage stamps or literal stamps or Post-it notes. And so it was these larger explorations, like this one, that I used and also I repurposed. So these two actually have also been repurposed and framed for the Art About the Land exhibit. I think it's in Anderson right now. And so these also took another form. So these took life on a life as a product. So these are scarves, and these 3 scarves are actually down in the gallery currently. So I'd encourage you, especially students, to take your artwork, create things with them. You have the technology now to make t-shirts and mugs and scarves. And I'd encourage you to do it, and not for some passive income stream scheme, but for other reasons, for fun and for joy. Thank you.
Does this count as my first slide? Can y'all hear me? Yeah, okay. So, thank you to CAP for organizing this. I spent some of my research time during the pandemic on building and studying important simple chairs, often between Zoom meetings with my students. My images are the ones in color of the stuff I built, and the black and white are the research images. The focus was mainly on 2 separate designers, Enzo Mari and Jarrett Reitfeld. Enzo passed away in 2020 from COVID. He was an important Italian postmodern designer who was a very early promoter of DIY design, arts and crafts, and how it related to communism. He designed across multiple disciplines, and his work is in most major museums around the world. He was in the highly influential Museum of Modern Art show, Italy, the New Domestic Landscape, curated by the architect Emilio Ambaz, an early design consultant for Cummins down in Columbus, Indiana. In 1974, Enzo published a book with his designs as open source. He instructs the designer to build practical, useful furniture pieces through very simple techniques, hoping that the benefits drawn from this process of making would be more valuable than the object being made, as quoted by his longtime gallery. While building the pieces, one becomes aware that you can build this stuff without the use of a tape measure. These pieces have an internal logic on where to put them, no matter what the dimensions are. Enzo's political philosophy was strongly opposed to the idea that good design is a privilege for the wealthy. He believed that good design was a human right. And I often refer to this quote in my teaching and in my own work. I want to create new models. I want to create models for a different society. All the material I used came from reclaimed sources. Chris Battaglia's formwork for Exhibit Columbus, urban forestry, and have these been switching? I thought this was supposed to be, I was supposed to be doing that? Oh. It was supposed to be time? All right. Can we zoom the YouTube back a little? I'm going to go back. Sorry, guys. It's all sort of synced, I think. I was like, that's the longest 20 seconds ever. All right. Well, let me do this. I will go through a few. So that's Enzo. That's Enzo building the chair. This is what I mean by that you don't need a tape measure. You can see he's lining things up. This is his book he produced of the open source furniture. And this is where I'm at right now. Sorry. So all the material I used came from reclaimed sources. Chris Battaglia's formwork for Exhibit Columbus, urban forestry, including trees from campus, a couple of trees from my yard, the old honors house that they tore down behind the student center, which somehow was placed into the back of my truck. For Mari's work, I used white and yellow pine, as well as vertical grain Douglas fir, being a very hard material to get around these days. And I just want you guys to notice on the upper left, the amount of growth rings in one of those pieces of wood as compared to a piece of wood you get at Lowe's these days. The second designer, Jarrett Reitfeld, an important avant-garde 20th century architect, professor, and furniture designer, and one of the major contributors to the Distill movement, seen here sitting on one of his earliest designs for the red-blue chair outside of his Utrecht shop. I have, for many decades, been inspired by his work. Simple, clean, novel, and very comfortable. I sometimes get the privilege to lead a class for the design and construction of simple chairs, so I often build the chairs in advance with my students, always learning something new from the work. One of Reitfeld's most important designs are the crate furniture pieces. He was more impressed with the crates that typical furniture arrived in more than the actual chairs themselves. Similar to Mari, that good design should not be expensive, he developed a set of designs based on using found material of the crates. This project would later be picked up by one of the most important 20th century, this project would later be picked up by the most important 20th century architect named Frank Gehry, seen promoting the strength of his popular cardboard furniture. And this reflected his response and critique of European modern furniture of Corbeau, Mies, Breuer, etc. Some of the principles of the Distill was a paring down of excess in the reaction to the Art Deco and the wish to make a new world after the horrors of World War I. All of these designs use a basic module system that can be made with a simple set of tools. Clear examples are the tables in which there are only two different dimensions of wood. When I'd finish a piece, I would take them down to Cap's Muncie Make lab for documentation. I admired how the work contrasted and complemented the space. Photography is important in how one promotes the work. Janice and I have always been influenced by Charles and Ray Eames and their approach to design and photography of a building in the context to which they work. Often in his work, the composition of multiple pieces produces a field condition of lines and planes. The mirroring of the work creates new and unexpected spaces between the chairs. For me, the importance of this type of work is that it is architecture, but it is much faster than architecture. The chairs are not just chairs. Think of them as novels. They contain many different plots and subplots. Material is not just matter. It has a history to it that makes it matter, whether it's a previous life as a tree, a tool, or a home. These chairs have functions beyond just a place to sit. They reflected larger societal concerns and offered alternatives to the worlds around them. I end this with a thought by George Nakashima, the legendary woodworker. Trees have a yearning to live again, perhaps to provide the beauty, strength, and utility to serve, even to become an object of great artistic worth. Thank you.
I want to do it like Lord and Dig, right? Like this. If I have to say I am the girl, so you don't need my name, right? I'm the only one. Well, I am Ana de Brea, as I think you know. So maybe I took it more philosophically, I believe. This is one of the memes that I found online. And it was interesting to me because this expresses the question, right? How we relate, how we connect to each other. And I think it's both. It's a question that is urgent, but also ancient, right? It's forever. So maybe the oldest question that is echoing with the ages, right? Those differences and well, now with the pandemic, right? Expresses the most important problem with this pandemic to me. So I go with this one, I believe. Yeah. So I wanted to say where I was before the pandemic, because maybe some of you do not know me, or I think no one knows me. So I think it's, I was always interested in this concept of flexibility. I had been working in my studios and also in my own work in architecture in those terms. I am interested in the notion of building volumes, right? What is that? I don't call buildings, I don't relate to the pieces of architecture as just buildings. So these are different topics that I discuss in the studio. In my studios, and I'm very prolific. I do a lot of projects at the same time. I get bored easily, so it's not a gift. It's just I try to do different projects, and this is a sequence of all the projects that I had been doing before, right? 2 or 3 years before the lockdown. So with professionals, with students, with myself, right? Thinking and and trying to discuss things all over the world. I think that is also very important, to be connected to the rest of the world, to understand a little bit better our own world. I have been trying different type of materials. I don't consider myself an artist. My mentor, Clorindo Testa, he was really an artist, so I found, for 2 reasons, I don't feel comfortable. That's one. And the other one is that I would like to see architecture as art. I try to see architecture as art. I think, well, yeah, my position here in the building relates to that, right? The relationship between architecture and art. And I like to use, my hands. I think that my hands are important to me. And I try to use generally just one material, and if possible, not at no cost. So I find materials around, and I try to use it and see how I make something that is functional. So I was very proud before the lockdown, with this house that I finished in Buenos Aires. It was my first work with metal, so it was very interesting to me. And the owner of the house, the one that lives there, is very happy with the house. We are still connected, so that's very important. So, and I was right before I started the lockdown, before anyone, because I was in Europe in February 2020. I was in the countries that really everything was happening. This is Tadao. I was invited to participate of this visit. This is an interesting project by Tadao Ando in Paris. It's the first project by Tadao Ando in France. So where the client is Italian, Tadao Ando is Japanese, and the project is an existing building that used to be the Chamber of Commerce, and it was transformed into a museum. But I was invited to write an article about this project, so I met different people that were related, and still cannot open because the lockdown stopped everything in the process. So to me, what's interesting, this notion of having a client that is Italian, calling a Japanese architect. They did together some projects for the Venice Biennale before, together. So this Italian client buys this building that had a certain hierarchy, but also the volume was very fixed. And I was really interested in knowing how Tadawando was going to work on this building. So probably, if everything is okay, I will go during spring break to this place. But this notion of nothing is the same as what it was, right? I was in the same trip after France. I went to Spain. I was in Barcelona visiting my publisher, meeting with him, and he gave me this book. We are in the process of publishing another book, and these were, the question that this book was at that moment published, and these are, very interesting people that were discussing what is education in architecture, and they were putting these particular words as titles for their contribution to the book. So I am still, reading. I like that generally are words that do not relate to the common description of architecture. In similar terms, this is a piece that, is the Barcelona Pavilion by Mies van der Rohe. That the real one, right, doesn't exist, right? This is the reconstruction of the Barcelona Pavilion. So that was done by Ignacio de Solá Morales. So we still think, when we go to Barcelona, we look at the Barcelona Pavilion thinking that is by Mies van der Rohe, because we had that. No one knows de Solá Morales, even when he was an excellent architect from Spain. But what is interesting is that this is, in that year, the 2019, it was considered the most popular building, most popular piece of architecture in the world, and it's a piece of architecture that doesn't exist, right? So, originally. This is where I am coming from. So the same trip was hadn't stopped in Italy, was my first workshop in Europe. I was really very excited. And so this is where I am, I come from, right? So this is the north of Argentina and central of South America, where people construct and build their own pieces, right? Not only the houses where they live, but also, how they wear, how, they maintain, or even the kids, right? And also the tools they use to create the different pieces that they create, and also the jewelry, as you see here. So, in the same scenario, and in relationship to the things that are defined and the ones that I believe architecture we shouldn't define. So this is the roofless church. Everybody knows, I hope. If not, it's a wonderful project by Philip Johnson, where everybody looks for, right, the roof, and it doesn't exist. Or they limit, I was there doing a little research, and they were referring to me that people that when they visit, they believe that the church is right, it's just that piece because it has the roof, right? But the church is the whole plaza. So the church doesn't have any roof. So I understand that interesting because it's a wonderful departing point in the studio, right? To start when we start the discussion, right? To not start thinking of a roof or a building, to start thinking of architecture as a cultural project, something that can help other people to live better. This is kind of similar idea. This is the Chairless by Alejandra Ravenna. Pritzker Prize, Alejandra Ravenna from Chile. So I would say that he stole, I swear I didn't do anything. This is moving. So, okay, so the chair is that, line, right, of fabric, right? And, I believe, this was produced by Vitra also, and Alejandra Ravenna designed, Vitra produced. But this is really, they are the designers, right? They are the ones that said, this is a chair, right? And it's comfortable, and you can carry it with you. And it doesn't have the literal understanding of a chair, right? So I live by myself, so I have to say that the lockdown to me was really interesting because it was the first time, I think, in my life that I was the whole year in the same place. I used to travel a lot. So the notion of, you are reading there? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That's me, right? That explains that I live by myself, That part is very clear, right? Okay, so the notion of, communicating via being ready, right? Because we didn't know that this was going to happen, but, having a computer and knowing how to use it is very important. This is something that changed the notion of, to me also became very, very interesting. This is my uncle. He turned that year 90, and we celebrated. Imagine, he couldn't even understand it correctly, right, what was going on. He didn't know if I was there or if I was here, but we are seeing this very often and very common, so we do it like it was forever, like we do the Zoom, right? One day to another, we understood what that was, and we put it in practice. So, same trip, all this happened right before pandemic, right? I was so excited because I was coming, right, the new project for a book, or, continuing that, and this is Ben van Berkel from Holland, UN Studio, United Network, that also very interesting to me, right from, the title of the office, United Network. They have people from all over the world. They speak different languages. They have their own money just to use the machines, right, inside of they are two partners, principal partners, a man and a woman. That's very interesting also. And it was very interesting that I could never imagine that. I studied their work, and, he was writing in his Instagram that he was, he mentioned, you see there, that is literally a screenshot from his Instagram page, and he says there that after Le Corbusier, I don't know, he mentioned different, Perret and all the people that he mentioned, he says, Clorindo Testas, was very interesting, but perhaps what inspired me the most after all was Clorindo Testas' work, my mentor, a person from Argentina. He never met that person, and it was very inspirational for him. Later, this past of July, I had an interview with him because I wrote, of course, it was so emotional for me. He's emotional now. He was a great, great architect. And, on this, I wrote that singular thing, right, in an article. I published it in Latin America. So, and because of, I'm very lucky. So these people from France that I was there for a little while, I had to change, and I met people in a bar when I was waiting for the change of my flight. And they knew a family that I did my first project there in Paris. I renovated an apartment there. So they contracted me to, to do now his apartment there that is really big. It's 3 stories high, and one of the stories is very, very old, and there are 2 different new pieces. So they are like 3 apartments in a very particular, typical, right, building in France. So I had to do all these drawings and to connect to people. I am all the time with the computer, right? And I am now their design consultant. That was a new way for me to produce work as an architect. I never thought I would have that opportunity. And this is really interesting. We are almost now finishing. I am really excited. On the other side, so I was coming, right? And I had these people, I tried to connect to these people. My methods generally are, knitting, crocheting, working by hand, and sometimes without even using any tool. And I follow these people, right, that are in this one. I want to know how you pronounce his name. Here, sorry. Well, it doesn't matter. They directly, they try to create spaces. These are artists that work with this. In fact, that is a retrospective of the art. The art that is not alive. But this is Elanauzi, so we have here in Indy, I think we have a piece by him. But also, they create these type of fabrics, right? Same as, and work with light, and they create this type of filters, the same as these artists, this architect, Anna Heringer. I was, talking just a few hours ago in my studio about this artist that she did, the school by hand. This is in Bangladesh, right? And you get to see, right, the school and how she works with women teaching. Imagine that in Bangladesh is the most, I think it's the most populated, country in the world. So, and they have, I was referring to the students that they live in spaces where they don't even, they cannot put a TV in because there is no space, and that's literal. So I just took a few pictures here, but the ones that appear on top are the ones from the Venice Biennale that I visited, and I got to know this architect. She is originally from Germany, and she does that type of work. She tries to create spaces, right, for people to live better. So, and the final 2 images is the work that I brought here. That is in the atrium. Thank you to the students that helped me put it there. So this is all tags, that I connect. So one of my friends was saying that he wants to film me when I'm coming from a store, how I organize myself, or I take the different pieces. And so these are pieces that I have been collecting, right? That pieces that go to the trash, really, right? So that's the idea. So these are the tags that we never read, right? That we take and we go all the descriptions of materials or how we wash, right? A particular object or whatever, or a piece of garment. So, and I was connecting, what it was interesting to me, it was, so you can think how crazy I am. How, because they are not a module at all. They are not regular forms. I don't believe there is any normal. I don't believe in normal. I believe that there is change and always more change. So, and this was really a big one. So, I found interesting, the method that was the former professor, Wes Chance, came to visit one day and with mask. And he was asking me about, different methods. So we started talking, right? Having a coffee and discussing about architecture, through this piece that was just a bunch of, right, these pieces that some of them, I don't even need to make the whole, the whole, comes. And so, and I am, it's not finished. I propose, I send these images, some images to different galleries, and we are putting an exhibition in August in New York. So I hope it's going to be done by then. Nothing else. Thank you.
All right, hello. Art made during a pandemic is not unique to our times. This image shows a painting, the effects of which were the pandemic of the bubonic plague. But if you look closely at the faces here, I think you'll see other things as well, things like community and even resiliency. Today I wanted to similarly rethink or recalibrate how the pandemic has impacted my life and in turn my art. Watercolor painting is known by many attributes, one of which is transparency. The laying of washes and layers, putting sediment down on the paper is a way to see or to reveal texture and to illuminate what's beneath and to also reflect what's above. But transparency can also refer to the ways in which we respond to other people. Do we hold them back at arm's length, or do we welcome them into our personal space? And today I want to be transparent with you. My wife Jane has lymphoma. It's a disease, it's an incurable cancer of the immune system. For the last 10 years, she's undergone 4 rounds of chemotherapy, each one of which takes 6 infusions. Hers is the face of the immunocompromised. And so when we hear that COVID is especially devastating to the immunocompromised, it hits especially close to home for us. And when we hear that people are willingly not getting vaccinated, that hurts us. From last Thanksgiving through last Easter, plus or minus, she received one of those rounds of chemotherapy, 6 infusions. The drugs that she received to fight that cancer were also drugs that fight her ability for the COVID vaccine to take effect. It attacks the COVID vaccine. As a result, even though she has all of her shots, she's no longer able to really fight the COVID. But as the weather turned warmer, as winter turned to spring and then summer, our thoughts turned to gardening and being outside, and we thought about ways to do projects together that would turn our attention toward that. And so we collaborated on a simple sign project where I painted a sign on a reclaimed slate tile that would be hung at the entrance to our garden house. Yes, it utilized interests in typography and environmental graphics and interests in found objects. But it was more than that. It was a collaboration, an example of how art can be used to improve our everyday existence. That same attitude translated to indoor spaces as well. In our kitchen, we had a simple writing desk that was used more as a table for the coffee maker than for actually writing anything. And so one day Jane said to me, it'd be great, Craig, if you could design something and build it underneath that table to take advantage of that unused airspace. Maybe she didn't say it quite like that. That's probably too much architecture speak, but you get the idea. So I looked at that and I said, yeah, that's something we can do. And she recommended that to me because she knows that woodworking is another avenue that I enjoy for making art. It's not just drawing or painting, but it's woodworking as well. And so we collaborated on that design. We're looking at Pinterest boards and looking at different things, scouring the internet for ideas, ordering supplies online, again, because being out in public, doing shopping face-to-face is potentially life-threatening. And so the end result was a cherry wood cabinet, complete with pull-out shelves and storage baskets, custom trim and routed faceplates. Those combined, again, made an art piece that allowed us to make simple improvements that improved our everyday life using art at home. Well, lost and found edges are another very valuable resource in watercolor painting. They suggest changing relationships and shifting limits. where one object begins, it disappears, and another takes its place, only for the first object to reappear. Well, the pandemic has given me a similar opportunity to reassess my roles and relationships and responsibilities. Last December, I flew out to Seattle to help my mom get ready for hip replacement surgery that had already been postponed once due to COVID. But I was also there to help my dad deal with diminished cognition and reduced mobility brought on by advancing Parkinson's disease. Lost and found edges apply not only to the sketch here, the portrait behind me, but also to my relationship and my role with my parents, where once they had been the ones to instruct or demonstrate or teach me, now I was the one doing the demonstrating or instructing or teaching. And so what had been relationships and contours really of family relationships had changed, and they were being reassessed. They had been lost and now found in a new way. That idea of combining lost and found edges with woodworking and familial love came together in yet another project. This one done when my daughter asked if I could design and build a coat tree for her entryway to help organize the space in her house. And I said, yes, I'd be happy to do that as long as she would provide me with the existing condition dimensions, right? So she sent those to me, and we collaborated on Zoom and on Facebook and other electronic means to create this design. Then over a 4-day period, I worked with her husband, my son-in-law. We made several masked trips to Home Depot and other stores to collect supplies, and we brought those back home. And then in their garage and driveway, we painted and we sawed and we nailed. We did more than that, though. We bonded. We bonded over a 3-generational work of art. And by the way, that's the tiny foreman there in the striped uniform. When Jane and I moved to Muncie 3 months before the pandemic hit, we had a space that we wanted to use for a garden, but there was no direct access from the house to that space. There was no door. And so I looked at the garage window there as an opportunity to create a door, a passageway that would allow that indoor-outdoor access that we so coveted. But after it was built, we realized it was more than a door. It was a focal point. It was an organizational element that helped give reason and purpose and direction to a space that previously had been devoid of that. And so then I did a watercolor portrait of that door as not only a passage from indoor to outdoor, but also as a portal, if you will, along which the edges of the house could be lost and then found again. When a watercolor painter begins a painting, they have all the white that they're ever going to have. And that's because there is no such thing as white paint in watercolor painting. So white paper has to be guarded jealously. And the only way that we understand the white and the value of it is to put dark values in contrast around it. So while the pandemic has been a time of challenge for my family in many ways, in contrast, it's also been a time of joy and happiness. During the pandemic, Jane and I became grandparents for the 3rd and 4th time with the arrival of Owen, and then 3 months later, Caleb. And visits to their family, made of course only after we got the all clear from our rapid tests that allowed us to get down there. We had those visits that were, there were times of joy and happiness and laughter and a few tears at times too. But those times were made all the more special in the realization that we couldn't take them for granted, that they were special. Now I call these two, let's do this here. I call these two portraits Boys with Sticks. And it's a reminder to stay back because you don't want to be near a 2-year-old when they start swinging a stick around at you. Definitely dangerous. Back when we thought the pandemic was going to last a couple months, remember those days? I thought of projects that I could do in my garage, social distancing, and so I wanted to do an Adirondack bench. And so sketches became working drawings, became mock-ups, became piles of cedar sawdust. But the end result was a bench where a pair of tired gardeners could sip lemonade, or a couple after a morning run could rest, or that same couple could hold hands, or a couple grandparents could hug their grandchildren. You see, no one goes into a pandemic ever thinking, I'm going to start a new way of thinking about my art. It's not like there's a new day and I'm going to start a new art that day. It's only when we've accumulated art and we can look back at it as a body of work and we can understand a new context to understand how the pandemic or any other event has affected our lives. And so in that vein, I understand now that the pandemic is, or that my art, is more than just watercolors or woodworking. It's more than just transparency or lost and found edges or contrast. It's more about making my mark on the lives of the people around me and allowing them to make the imprint of their lives on mine in return. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So, just a couple before I get going. Professor De Brea, change is the only constant in life, Anna, right? And now I have the microphone. So it's time to change to my turn with the microphone, because you took the microphone for quite a long time, right? Professor De Brea she says, I like you a lot, but you love the microphone. She says to me, that's her assessment of me. First time, that's right. And then the 250th time when we met in Paris, right? Where did we meet? Ando, right? Yeah. Travel is one of the most important things you can do for your education. Travel is one of the most important things that you can do for your education. Because when you get to travel, it relates to something that Brian Eno, the famous composer who worked with Talking Heads and David Bowie, etc., said that sometimes when you arrive new to a place, you can really see it. Right? And then something magical happens when you return from travel. You come home, and your eyes are fresh, and all of a sudden, everything around you is unfamiliar, right? Getting back to this notion that Professor Deeg is framing this talk with, which is the everyday. Beauty in the everyday. Okay, forget that. Also got to say, this is a great honor to be in this company with these colleagues presenting this really amazing work, taking time to reflect on this, with Professors Deeg and Blaylock, Coggeshall, De Brea, Farnsworth, San Miguel. Really amazing. I mean, I have a ton of respect for the work that they're showing and the time that they've spent pulling this together to show you. It's kind of a dream team. I bet every one of them could give you a lecture on beauty, right? So I wanted to start off really by devoting this talk to Professor Deeg, and this was actually before I knew that you'd organized this whole exhibition. And the reason I want to is because I ran into him in the basement last week, and he said, do you remember that time when we used to go around and take pictures of funny stuff? And people used to say, you guys are just taking pictures of funny stuff. Because every Thursday, Professor Deeg and I and another colleague would go in a dually around the Delaware County and take pictures of funny stuff, and then have a tenderloin sandwich, right? Looking for the perfect. The title of this talk is not Invisible Cities. It is Notes from the Middle, Visual Reflections on the Everyday in East Central Indiana. I'm going to do what Professor San Miguel and Coggeshall and I were talking about in architecture. They used to show two images side by side as part of the staple of lecture, right? Because sometimes you can read in between the two things a lot more than what's being said on the microphone. And so I'm taking a cue from one of my dear friends who's passed away, is Doug Garofalo, who showed a simultaneously image of a video that he made on the longest street in Chicago, Clybourne Avenue, trying to reveal this notion of the car culture and its impact on the everyday. So I'm doing a similar type thing. I'm going to be reading a poem that I read in the Redwoods for a very important meeting with some poets and big thinkers, and And this is the poem that I had written with my friend that you and I met at in the Venice Biennale, right? So anyhow, devoted to Professor Deeg, to find beauty wherever you are, and to find beauty in the everyday. Objects in the rearview mirror are closer than they appear. Automobiles are our identity. Cars are an extension of our freedom. We name them this way: the Liberty, Celebrity, Odyssey, Legacy, Discovery, Passport, Prowler, Voyager, Venture, Vision, Esteem, Spirit. Making mobility is part of our national identity, and making mobility and crafting cars and pushing performance. Our identity is information. Notes from the middle, actually hashtag notes from the middle, are reflections on the identity and information that are middleness. Hashtag it. Take pictures of funny stuff. I belong in the middle, a Hoosier. I identify with the Middle West in Indiana, where we make stuff. Dear 2022, we gotta keep making good stuff. Right here in the middle. 100 years ago, the Midwest manufactured 50% of everything in America. 100 years ago, Indiana had 150 automobile manufacturers. 100 years ago, Indiana was the ABCs of automobile innovation, with the American, the Black Hawk, the Comet. 100 years ago, Indiana made automobile culture. Auburn, Duesenberg, Marmon, Packard, Studebaker, Stutz. 100 years ago, Indiana made our country's automobile-driven identity with the Empire, the National, the Prosperity. 150 years ago, Elwood Haynes launched out on a country road outside of Kokomo, Indiana, where my dad grew up, and changed the landscape before him. After that, we stopped calling on our neighbors, and instead we invited them to go on motor tours, much like what we did, Professor Deeg, in the Dooley, exploring our freedom to move about the country, exploring our individual liberty. They first called it the horseless carriage, as if. The only carriage similarity was that the companies making cars used to make carriages. Now we speedily renamed them to automobiles, and we rapidly improved their design. Yeah, we made cars in Indiana, good cars. And we led their innovation, and we perfected them. Back home again in Indiana, we pushed the limits of automobile performance. We altered the landscapes, and we made new maps. The Brickyard was built as a test facility, a proving ground for innovation. Now we call it the Indy 500, the greatest spectacle in racing. By pushing its performance, we failed designs faster. We retooled, we perfected. And the firsts out of there were, in 1911, the rearview mirror and the safety belt. 1925, front-wheel drive. 1935, colored warning lights, both green and yellow. 2000, collapsible steering columns. In 2012, a mechanical paradigm has shifted to a data-driven paradigm. A data-driven paradigm. Pit crews with tablet PCs, custom applications, real-time communications, servers. We are racing information now. Do we need drivers? Perhaps, if only for their identity. Information identity now. Cars continue. Identify innovation. Maintain making stuff. Gentlemen, start your engines. Ladies and gentlemen, fire up your smartphones. We can't really call them automobiles anymore. It's this horseless carriage thing. But gentlemen, ladies, and gentlemen, our future is behind the wheel. Let's make good stuff. And let's take good notes. Hashtag notes from the middle. Use it. Think about it. Here are some of my notes from the middle, from right around us, from the everyday, trying to search for beauty in the everyday, Professor Deeg. Crossroads of flyover. No matter where you are, there you are. Notice what you notice. That doesn't mean notice. It doesn't mean go out there and notice. It means notice what you notice. Notes from the middle. So, if you want to hear it in a different way, we'll turn to William Burroughs, as written by Laurie Anderson, who says,
And Sharky says, deep in the heart of darkest America, home of the brave, he says, listen to my heartbeat. Taking Mr. Sharky, white courtesy telephone, please.
yeah, he's right. Listen to your heartbeat. Thank you.
Okay, one of the things I've learned over the few years here at CAP is usually I go last because it's alphabetical. So I've only decided to show 6 slides, so bear with me. It's going to be very quick. I've decided to go to what I call my patient zero. These are the final culminations of a lot of different tests, and then they've led to variations. But these are the ones where I hit a point where I thought they made final sense to me. Also, I would like just to say that I consider everything I do just a test. I just make things randomly. This is a process that I've kind of learned through traveling. I completely, wholeheartedly agree with what Kevin said. A lot of the themes I realized in the past couple of years in making these since the pandemic hit actually goes back to things I probably observed and witnessed when I was not much older than some of the students here and traveling through Central America. So when everything first hit, I completely freaked out, just like everybody else. I'm human. And I remember that first day when all of the professors in first year gathered around, and I realized that I might have actually been one of the worst off. I didn't realize I was a Luddite in my knowledge of technology. Thankfully, I had a great partner in Natalie Yates, and Natalie and I quickly shifted to talking and figuring everything out for our studios and our sections. And then when we shut everything down, I was literally the last person walking around. I took photos of every single room in this building walking along alone. And I thought, when are we going to be back? Well, then we shifted to trying to show our students how to work online. And I made the mistake of telling Natalie, what if I showed an example? And then I thought, oh God, I got to make an example. So I created this, and the process I go through, I'm not showing the process. It was really nice to see everyone's process. My process is a little bit different. I sort of have learned or made my own mutations from Dadaist and Surrealist methods of I create games for myself. I create word games, I create dice games, I create card games, and then I usually put in series of vocabulary words, and then I'll see what comes up. These are essentially a form of method of design called chance operations. So this was creating in a 3-hour block, just going as fast as I could, overnight, series of tests, and then a final 3-hour block, utilizing my a couple of life cereal boxes and a few other REI things, trying to create an idea of a project that had no perceivable entry, because one of the words was omnidirectional. Another word was binary. So there's a series of kind of symmetrical but non-symmetrical moves that happen in here. And so this was really patient zero for what I would have been doing the last couple of years. That led to a few other explorations, and those who have known me long enough know that I've been sort of addicted my whole life to soda. That's a problem that actually I've gotten better at. But then one day, I started really realizing that I had a lot of big red boxes left over. And because I was thinking of Japan, and I had been traveling to Japan and going there for many, many years now, and I started wondering about why Japan was known as the land of the rising sun. Well, about 15, 20 years ago, when I first encountered Japan, I encountered something called the Motenai Festival. The Motenai Festival is this idea, Motenai means basically what a waste. This idea that you waste not, you want not, and that everything can be recycled. And I started to think to myself, finally, like, man, I produce a lot of waste myself just as a human being, and I'm not even traveling anymore, and look at all this waste and things. Along with that, 15, 20 years ago, I got interested in this idea called Kinsugi, and Kinsugi is this idea of taking broken pottery pieces and reconfiguring them and recombining them either with a lacquer that is also blended with a powder of platinum, gold, or silver. So essentially the idea is that you're starting to see now, many years later, are what I have created in my mind, which is beauty out of simplicity, but beauty out of fragmented and broken forms. That something inherently that seems imprecise can lead to a larger, precise collage or condition of space. And so when I create something like this, there's a game that I'm playing. I've tested out that I know how to create a perfect circle out of paper. I've got a paper cutter. The point's not trying to do that. The point is trying to see, with just some scissors and a glue stick, can I mimic doing that, and through the imperfections, kind of trick a person's eye and get them to see different aspects of it, rather than, oh, every circle's perfectly cut. In fact, there's not one perfect circle that's cut there on purpose. And then that led to a series of other explorations where I started to notice and pick up trash. I believe that all designers are inherently hoarders, so we all have that built into us. And I happened to notice that there was some 2017 Columbus pamphlets from when we had Exhibit Columbus in 27 that were being thrown out. So these next two are a series of those. And really what I'm trying to do here is I'll try to find a thing, and I'll try to stay within that thing. I have plenty of collages and assemblages and bricolages, but recently I've tried to say I'll find a thing, and I'll simply attempt to try to reconfigure it and redesign it in some new fashion. So this is essentially a series of explorations using simple methods of singular linear forms, trying to find or pull something out of the design itself, like these little gaps or these little lines that were in the graphic designer's kind of bag of tricks, and then figuring out how I can explore that. I also sort of believe everything that gets done or that I do should have a multivalent way of reading. It should be able to be rotated and seen in different conditions. And that's probably something I've just picked up over the years. So every one of these could be rotated. There's no front, there's no center, there's no back, there's no left, there's no right. I like to think of everything myself as it's a collapsible section or a plan eventually when I start to doodle, and there's doodles in my sketchbook of what it might be someday. This one, again, coming off of those recyclable sort of Columbus little pamphlets, started to remind me essentially of droplets of water in a pool of water. And so someone asked me recently, how do they come up with a good name for a project? And I go, well, don't think about it much. Second thing is write every 30 minutes or so what your ideas are to that project, and then finally come up with something that is a synonym of a synonym of a synonym of something. And so ultimately, what was going through my mind was essentially wave interference, or waves that were droplets of rain on a body of water. And then as I started to construct this and go through my sort of process, my game that I created, it started to create what I called wave interference. And so it was a constructive interference of how the design kind of came, so that it would hopefully ebb and flow through space and time, both in a foreground, middle ground, and background condition. The last two that I'll show are very similar. These are actually made to be vertical. They're bigger than some of the other ones because I like to try to stay in a simple format of a 16 by 16 or 18 by 18 square. Again, not worrying about the outer form, but looking at how things collapse inside and create conditions. But these were a little bit different. This was a different kind of game, chance operation game, which I know I did not invent. It was popular, again, post-surrealist. And the idea here is I would essentially identify a material that I'm going to cut up into strips, and then I would essentially create a series of boxes, and then I would drop those from different heights. This one took the longest because I'm dropping them, picking them up, dropping them, picking them up, taking photographs, looking at them, looking for opportunities in terms of the overlay and the interaction of the forms. But again, going back to what Craig said, these two are really about how to try to activate the white space, how to try to activate the space around the forms in terms of possible spatial effects. And the final one, this one actually started out as a drawing of a tree. If you rotate it vertical and you look at the kind of branches that are kind of coming out, and the trunk's actually over here where those three are kind of repeating. A lot of what I do, again, they're just tests. I don't consider them art or anything. They usually actually start out as me doodling something in nature. I'm doodling a rock or I'm doodling a tree, and then I blow that up, and then somehow in my brain it transforms from something natural to that. And I have no other good explanation other than that's what comes out. So ultimately, where this ends up going in terms of my process and things that I've learned over the years is that there's always existing conditions, and as an architect or designer, you're reacting to existing conditions. So when the pandemic hit, and when that very first patient zero test hit, the last couple of years, I've tried to isolate the condition to one or two things and then see what might evolve out of those very limited, in this case, basically just a Coke box. And then what might I be able to do? And so there are some that are more geometrical and some that are more abstract, but in the end, it's just simply me trying to see what might happen. That's how my tests go. Thank you.
It is said that art is a window to the soul. Thank you for looking through those windows and seeing all of the work. Thank you to the presenters. Thank you, everybody.